Robin Warr was a native of Syracuse, New York, where her father Robert had served as the city's first black city council member in the late 1960s and early 1970s. She grew up to be a strikingly tall and beautiful woman who was very athletic and enjoyed activities like tennis and biking. When she married for the first time, she lived in Connecticut, but she got divorced and moved to Washington, D.C. in the mid-1980s. 5 days after Christmas of 1989, Robin married again to a man named Ollie Lawrence Jr. The couple married in an intimate ceremony at their home on a wooded cul-de-sac in Springfield, Virginia, surrounded by poinsettias. 3 years later, Robin gave birth to their daughter, Nicole. Robin loved the arts and was a talented artist herself. A graduate of the Carnegie Mellon College of Fine Arts, she was able to incorporate art into her successful career. By 1994, she was the director of promotion and merchandising at Merchants Tire and Auto Center in Manassas, Virginia. Her husband Ollie was the vice president of human resources for U.S. Air, and he had to travel to the Bahamas for work on the Friday before Thanksgiving of 1994. That day, Robin went to work as usual. When she came home, she did some shopping with her 2-year-old daughter, and then dropped her nanny off at a nearby metro station. Ollie tried calling Robin late that night after he arrived in the Bahamas, but she did not answer the phone. He called all throughout Saturday, but never reached his wife. He had been growing increasingly anxious over not being able to reach her, and had been in contact with Robin's friend Linda because he was so concerned. He called Linda again Sunday morning, starting to panic because he could still not reach his wife, and asked her to go check on her. Around 11 a.m. on Sunday morning, November 20th, 1994, Linda called police and drove over to Robin and Ollie's home with another one of her friends. When they arrived, the weekend's newspapers were still outside. When no one answered the front door, the two women walked around the house and onto the back deck, where they found an open window. They called in to Robin, but only 2-year-old Nicole came to the window. She was dressed in a sleeper, sucking on a pacifier, and exuding a smell that indicated that her diaper had not been changed in some time. Alarmed, Linda and her friend pulled themselves into the house through the window. Linda picked up Nicole and began walking throughout the house, looking for Robin. Nothing looked out of place until she turned into the hallway leading to the master bedroom, when she saw blood spattered on the wall and pooling on the floor. Linda and her friend fled the house with Nicole and ran to a neighbor's house to notify police about what they had found. Robin had been stabbed and slashed repeatedly. Robin's autopsy found that she had been killed on Friday night, just 5 days before her 37th birthday. Her daughter Nicole was unharmed, but had been left alone with her mother's body all weekend. Robin's brutal murder was a shock to everyone who knew her, and they all struggled to imagine anyone wanting to hurt her. She would be the last person I would have imagined this happening to. She was too nice for someone to hurt, Chris Wilson, one of her co-workers, said. Despite the fact that Robin's husband Ollie had been in the Bahamas at the time of the murder, he was still publicly identified by police as a potential suspect in the case. Police believed that Robin must have been killed by someone she knew in a targeted attack. There were no signs of forced entry into the house, indicating that Robin may have let her killer inside. Furthermore, nothing had been stolen, and Robin had not been sexually assaulted, eliminating common motives for murder. Police therefore believed that whatever the motive for killing Robin was, it must have been personal. Ollie was more disappointed than offended by police focusing in on him because he knew he was innocent. He was upset that so much time was being wasted on investigating him, when time continued to drag on with no actual movement in the case. Investigators were eventually able to extract unknown DNA from a piece of evidence found at the crime scene. The exact nature of this evidence has not been detailed to the public, presumably because of ongoing legal actions. No matches were found to the DNA in criminal databases, but in 2019, the Fairfax County Police Department began working with Parabon Nanolabs to use alternative methods to utilize the DNA evidence to track down the killer. Parabon was able to generate an image of what they believed the killer may have looked like, based on his DNA. They also began using genetic genealogy in the case, but it took 3 years of work for them to finally identify a potential suspect. Looking at this person's high school yearbook photo and a DMV photo taken 2 years after Robin's murder, investigators believed that there was a strong resemblance to the image generated by Parabon. They then traveled out of state to collect a sample of his DNA so that they could compare it to the DNA from the crime scene. The potential suspect was a man named Stephen Smirk. He was a 51-year-old married father of 2, living in Niskayuna, New York. 2 detectives traveled there to speak with him, and he happened to be taking out his trash cans when they arrived at his home. He consented to have a conversation with them and voluntarily allowed them to swab his mouth to take a DNA sample. When they left, detectives left Smirk with their business card. A short time later, before they could leave to return to Virginia, they got a call from Smirk saying that he had to speak to them right away. They told him to turn himself in at his local police station, which he did. There, he gave the detectives a full, detailed confession to Robin Lawrence's murder and was arrested. Smirk had been an active duty member of the Army, stationed at Fort Myer, next to Arlington National Cemetery, at the time of Robin's murder. He had no connection to her, and the crime appears to have been random. The details he provided about the crime have not been made available to the public. Prior to his arrest for Robin's murder, Smirk had absolutely no criminal record. Smirk was extradited to Virginia and is being charged with second-degree murder. He is being held at the Fairfax County Adult Detention Center with no bond. Members of Robin's family, including her now-adult daughter Nicole, were present at the press conference announcing Smirk's arrest. Robin's husband Ollie has since remarried and retired to the south of France. Smirk's arrest resurrected feelings of grief for him, and he was shocked that he finally had answers after so many years. He told the Washington Post by phone, "I was flabbergasted. You could have probably knocked me over with a feather. After all this time, you have hope, but you also wonder, will they really find someone after 29 years? Yvonne leroux was the second of 4 children and lived with her family in Toronto. The family had moved there from Windsor when she was 3 years old. From a young age, Yvonne was industrious, brave, and very independent. She was always willing to stick up for what she believed was right. At the age of 15, her life took a bad turn. On July 1st, 1971, she took her younger brother to a fireworks show, where she ran into a male acquaintance. He offered to give her a ride home after he picked up 3 of his friends. Yvonne arrived home 2 hours after her brother, at 11 p.m. that night, in tears. She told her mother that she had been raped by the 4 boys. She made a report to the police and charges were filed, but they were later withdrawn that December. According to Yvonne's mother Diana, the ordeal destroyed Yvonne's self-confidence and made her feel worthless. As a result, she began making choices that further tore her life apart. She began hanging out with a rough crowd and was introduced to the local drug scene. She ran away from home and was gone for months. However, by late 1972, Yvonne had returned and was getting her life back together. She began going to school again and found a part-time job. She also began going to counseling sessions. Yvonne was last seen after one of these sessions on November 29, 1972, at approximately 10 p.m. Her mother came to pick her up from the session at the now-closed York Finch Hospital and was told that Yvonne had already left. Later investigation would show that Yvonne was going to get a ride from a male friend who also attended the session, but decided at the last second not to accept it. Yvonne's body was discovered by a passerby the following morning on 16th Side Road between Jane and Keele Streets in King Township, approximately 15 miles north of where she had last been seen the night before. She had been murdered. Her autopsy found that she had died as the result of blunt force trauma to her head, and that she had died only about 15 minutes before she was found. Theories quickly sprang up concerning the motive for the murder. Yvonne hitchhiked regularly, so it was conceivable that she had simply accepted a ride from the wrong person. However, Yvonne had also been fearing for her life for several months prior to her death. During the time when she was caught up in drugs, she had gotten mixed up with a motorcycle gang. She told her family that the gang had threatened her because she refused to run drugs for them. Yvonne had gone to police to report the threats. The drug squad took the information she provided seriously, and her home was being watched by police for her safety at the time of her murder. Foot and tire prints were also found at the scene. Despite these clues and possible motives for the murder, the case went cold. On March 27, 2014, the Regional Municipality of York Police Services Board announced a $50,000 reward in the case, but it would be almost another decade before Yvonne's murder was closed. On November 15, 2023, 51 years after Yvonne was murdered, the York Regional Police Cold Case Unit announced that her case had been solved. They had used genetic genealogy to trace DNA from the crime scene to a man they identified as her killer, Bruce Charles Cantillon. Cantillon could not be tried for the murder, as he had taken his own life just 19 months after Yvonne was killed. Cantillon was 26 years old at the time of the murder and living in Toronto. He was very well known to police, and his extensive criminal career had begun when he was just 18 years old. He had been incarcerated for both mental health reasons and for multiple violent sexual offenses against women. Yvonne's family released a statement following Cantillon's identification, saying that Yvonne had never been forgotten, and detailing how her murder had affected multiple generations of their family. They also stated that they hoped more funding would be provided for investigative genetic genealogy in law enforcement, so that more grieving families can have some form of clarity. "23-year-old Laura Kempton had a vibrant and outgoing personality. She was a free spirit who loved socializing. She was also very hardworking. She worked 2 jobs, one at the Marco Polo gift store and the other at Karen's ice cream parlor, while she was enrolled as a student at the Portsmouth Beauty School. At 9:30 a.m. on September 28, 1981, a police officer arrived at Laura's apartment at 20 Chapel Street in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, tasked with serving her a court summons related to parking tickets she had failed to pay. When he arrived at her door, one of the door panels, near the doorknob, was missing. When he looked through the opening, he saw a pair of legs sticking out from a pile of bedding and called for backup. Laura had been killed as the result of massive blunt force trauma to the left side of her head. It would later be believed that she had been struck with a wine bottle. Laura had gone out with a female friend for dinner and dancing on the night of September 27th. The friend last saw Laura when they parted ways outside of Laura's apartment building shortly after 1 a.m. on the 28th. Laura's autopsy would indicate that she had been killed a short time later, most likely between 1:30 and 3:30 a.m. The autopsy also found indications that Laura had been sexually assaulted. Hundreds of leads were investigated in the following decades, but no arrests were made. Then, in 2022, the Portsmouth Police Department began working in conjunction with the New Hampshire State Police Forensic Laboratory, the Maine State Police Forensic Laboratory, the Attorney General's Cold Case Unit, and Identifiers International to see if genetic genealogy could be used to solve Laura's murder. Because of how well the evidence from the scene had been preserved at the time of the crime, DNA had been identified on Laura's body, on a cigarette butt, and on a pillow. By running this DNA through a commercial DNA site, they were able to identify a relative and then later the parents of the man to whom the DNA belonged. Unfortunately, this individual was deceased. Authorities still conducted further testing in 2023. A blood sample was taken at this man's autopsy, and testing of it revealed that his DNA was a match to that found on the evidence in Laura's case. On July 20th, 2023, New Hampshire Attorney General John M. Formella and Chief Mark Newport of the Portsmouth Police Department released a statement to the media identifying Laura's killer as Ronnie James Lee, who had been 21 years old at the time of the crime. Lee had no known connection to Laura, but he did have an extensive criminal record and was known to be in Portsmouth at the time of her murder. Lee had served in the U.S. Army until May of 1981, and then went to work for MBI Security at Liberty Mutual in Portsmouth from July 1981 until August of 1982, when he was arrested by Portsmouth police on November 8, 1982, on an attempted theft charge. He provided them with his mother's address on Rock Hill Avenue in Portsmouth. He was linked to 4 residential and 1 commercial burglary in 1983 alone, and he pled guilty to 2 of them. In 1987, he was convicted of sexually assaulting a woman while burglarizing her home. He was incarcerated from December of 1987 until July of 1990 as a result. He died at the age of 45 on February 9, 2005, as the result of acute cocaine intoxication. While Lee cannot be prosecuted for Laura's murder, the Attorney General believes that the available evidence would have been sufficient to successfully obtain a conviction.